We would be remiss to think that turmoil overseas consumed all of the 1941 boys' attention. If anything, the events abroad compelled deeper reflection on conditions at home. In the period leading up to the Second World War, the American public's craving for information on major events was especially elevated. But it also gave rise to concerns about the reliability of news sources. Opinion pieces in the Owl and the Regis Quarterly urged the scrutiny of facts and motives even within conventional media channels. During a time of hostilities, there were growing worries over propaganda, false flags, and the nefarious fifth column of misinformation by proxies of foreign interests. Robert Cadow would argue that it was incumbent upon Regians to put effort into sifting through news and information to discern the truth for themselves. Complacency during those precarious times risked wearing down the foundations of American democracy. The Owl's editor, Alan Cameron, would go further in criticizing the state of American newspapers. He lamented the drift towards commercial interests and sensationalism in the name of profits, and away from the objective of providing high-quality reports. But he was particularly alarmed by newspapers' increasing tendency to focus on stories that validated readers' prejudices rather than the truths they should know about. In 1941, as there was an increase in nationalistic sentiment as America drew closer towards the European conflict, Joseph Landy would caution against overzealousness. Amidst growing patriotic outcries against dictatorship, he found ad hominem attacks on those whose opinions differed dangerous. He argued that left unchecked, it would paradoxically shift America towards the totalitarian nature of Russia and Germany, where freedoms of speech and individual liberties were suppressed. In a different essay, Joe Landy would forewarn that when a nation was at or nearing war, intolerance and hate often supplant freedom and justice. He expected America to enter the European theater, but advised that with blind nationalism, revulsion for Nazi Germany and prejudice against German Americans would quickly converge. Landy argued that to truly defeat all that Hitler stood for, American democracy must not be allowed to sacrifice its liberties for bigotry. During that period, racist ideologies in Europe would also inspire writings in the Regis Quarterly to reflect and criticize the domestic state of affairs. The editorials would be unflinching in noting America's guilt of unofficial and institutionalized racism against its black citizens, as well as the country's regard for its South American neighbors as inferior. As quick as Americans were to point out Hitler's persecution of Jews, so too must Americans consider their own poor, anti-Christian treatment of minorities. James McGovern and Thomas Gartland would both pen essays that further assail the treatment of blacks, at a time when segregation was still widespread and barriers blocking opportunities, education, and voting were the norm in much of the country. McGovern would also denounce the economic injustices persistent in American capitalism. He would note that the large wealth disparity between the masses of poor and the very rich was not only a societal failing, it risked fermenting support for ideologies such as communism and fascism. It's been a privilege to glean the introspection and awareness in the writings of Regians of the pre-war era. All would prove timeless, whether the articles address problems relating to the news media, prejudice born of nationalism, domestic racism, or even economic injustice. Those writings are just as relevant today as they were 8 decades ago, when they were written by the 1941 boys as high schoolers.